Is comedy the cause of mental illness, or could it be the cure? Let's start the show.
The Tom Kelly Show. Everybody, I want you to go to the Tom Kelly Show. I want you all to know about the Tom Kelly Show.
Here we go. Trigger warning. Spoiler alert. Is comedy the cure for mental illness or the cause? You are experiencing the Tom Kelly Show. I am doing a walking on the street selfie stick edition. I have a wireless mic that I'm going to try to use. It's a 2-channel wireless mic made by DJI, and I'm using a DJI Osmo 6 selfie stick. I met this man named Ryan. Ryan, what's your last name again? Zeitz. Ryan Zeitz is a mental health peer counselor who is using stand-up comedy to help people in the group. Fair? Legal? Yeah. Legally covered? Now, the whole reason why we're doing a selfie stick walk and talk is I've bought literally $400 worth of equipment because honestly, it is creepy asking weird, random people to come up to my apartment to be on the podcast. It's weird for them. It's weird for me. And honestly, man, let's see if this fancy little selfie stick and the fancy microphone will make it easier. Now, what we should be doing is just sitting down. I'm realizing right now the microphone might be amazing and the selfie stick is an unnecessary addition. And it's not a selfie stick, it's a gimbal. But the monologue on why I wanted to put Ryan on my little podcast here on the Tom Kelly Show. For those of you new to the Tom Kelly Show, the Tom Kelly Show is the podcast where the offbeat come to meet. It is the podcast where Tom Kelly owns his midlife crisis. It's the podcast where people in transition come for a laugh. And of course, it is the place where we have unsolicited opinions. That said, by the way, it's Tom Kelly doing stand-up comedy, Governor's Comedy Club, September 29th. Please tell a friend from Long Island to come buy a ticket at govs.com. I'm not selling enough tickets, and that's all I have to say about that. But listen, here's the monologue. There's a lot of effed up people in comedy. And, I'll watch people on stage, and I'm like, that guy's messy in the head. That guy's a nut job. That guy's a weirdo, whatever. And now you're teaching people who, are not right with themselves to do stand-up. Why?
Stand-up comedy saved my life in no uncertain terms.
What bullshit? Or, okay, really? Why? How?
It's a very long story. I could go back to, so I have bipolar disorder. I have bipolar type 2. And going back over a decade ago, I've had lots of ups and downs, forgive the pun.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I fell into I've had a couple of really, really long, lengthy, 4 or 5 month bouts of depression. And that has involved also just content warning for everybody. We're going to talk about, potential suicidal ideation, hospitalization, medication, all that kind of stuff. I always like to give a little content warning before talking about that.
I like that. See, I do that as my show intro, and I do that, I'm being facetious. Why are you doing what is a real trigger warning, and what does that mean?
For sure. So, firstly, even more interesting, we've actually changed the language on that too, where we call it a content warning, because sometimes trigger warning can also sometimes be triggering.
Oh my God.
Folks who
trigger warnings are triggering people. Oh my gosh, because it's a gun thing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, so if you're dealing with gun stuff, that's awful.
Yeah, which that's the difference between America and Canada too, I guess. You could joke about.
Well, let's get into, so listen, you're bipolar, and you're telling me that doing stand-up comedy or performing stand-up comedy saved your life.
Yeah, 100%. The more specific piece of that would be that I'd have to go back to 2018.
Right.
I was having a hypomanic episode and decided to be a whitewater rafting guide. And so I went to Outdoor Adventure College. It was a highly competitive program. They only accepted 35, 40 students a year. And I didn't even know how to swim. That's how you know I was a little not with it. But I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a whitewater rafting guide.
Okay.
And I wound up becoming class president. I had a 98 average. I had, job offers at the ready to do a whole bunch of cool whitewater rafting stuff,
Right.
and mountain biking and all the outdoor activities. But just this is the thing that sometimes people don't get, is that like you could be in the best place in your life doing exactly what you love, but with mental illness, in my case bipolar disorder, it doesn't really matter the circumstances that you're in. It's a chemical imbalance, right? And so despite all of that, I fell into a very, very deep depression.
Okay. Oh, sorry, guys.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I fell into a very, very deep depression and actually wound up dropping out of school. I moved back at home with my mom, and I spent about 4 or 5 months in bed and on the couch, just chronically depressed. Couldn't cook, wasn't eating right, wasn't sleeping right, and this bled through the winter of 2018 into 2019, and then it was around that time that I was finally diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Right.
I want to say it was March of 2019, but don't quote me.
So you're bipolar,
Yeah.
right? And you fall into a depression. You actually, even worse, you achieve a level of success, and then just something happened, the chemicals don't hit right, you're in depressed mode.
Yeah.
Were you medicating at that point? Did you know you were bipolar at that point?
No, I did not. No, I had one other like massive major depressive episode back in 2016 when I moved back from teaching English in Thailand, and I didn't know how to put it into words, but I could feel that same feeling creeping in, that same level of depression creeping in 2018 when I dropped out of the whitewater rafting program. And it was like, I didn't have words for it. And originally I just thought it was depression, but then I started talking with more doctors about it, and it became a whole
So hang on, you're getting more interesting by the minute here. but we're also so far away from
the actual talking point.
Yeah, we're so far away from the talking points, which is you fall into a depression hole, right?
Yeah.
And you said stand-up comedy saved your life. How? We get it. You're depressed, suicidal, real deal, medical, you're manic. You've done 2 different careers. How does stand-up comedy save your life?
For sure. So after I dropped out of school and was living at home, chronically depressed for 4 or 5 months, and then this comedy special came out this series of comedy specials came out on Netflix.
Whose?
So it was Comedians of the World, right? The Comedians of the World whole collection.
Okay.
Lots of different comedians from all the different countries in the world, all doing comedy in their native tongues. You know, there were comedians from China doing jokes in Mandarin and Cantonese. There were comedians from Spain doing jokes in Spanish.
Okay.
There were comedians from France and even Quebec in Canada doing jokes in French.
Right.
And so the one that really resonated with me was in the Canada English section. There's a guy named Ivan Decker. He's from BC.
Okay.
And it was just such an amazing, like tight, perfect, absolutely hilarious 30 minutes of comedy.
Right.
And that was probably the first time that I laughed or smiled or anything in months. And I just watched it over and over and over, to the point where like I knew all the words and I could recite all the bits, and my family
So it's funny, I have a much more compressed version of that story where I was in an awful car accident.
Oh shit.
And I mean, but we lived. It was a night story. It was a scary night. I want to be careful of saying that too. It was a scary night. And I saw David Letterman. And that's what made me want to be a comedian.
That's awesome.
But
not the car crash, but
no, and honestly, even the car crash, everybody lived. It was a blessing, thank God. I mean, nobody was really hurt. It was scary for a few hours, but in the end, despite that fear, everything turned out okay. So you're now medical. So watching this guy, Ivan Decker.
Yeah.
Is he famous?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, he was on Netflix. So
He was on Netflix. I mean, his career is going better than ours.
yeah.
Okay. Here's my question for you. Have you ever, so you now have watched a special.
Yeah.
Your energy has changed. You're laughing. You're now out of the hole. You're climbing out of the hole.
Yeah.
What's the next step?
So, I mean, that's when my family kind of really noticed everything. And so my dad had suggested taking a stand-up comedy class at Second City. He had done a class, because Second City also has a base in Toronto.
Okay.
I know it was founded in Chicago, but they have a base in Toronto. And so, yeah. So he had done an improv class there like years and years and years ago with one of his buddies. Had a great time, and he was like, "Why don't we sign up for stand-up?"
See, now that, my friend, is what I would call the proverbial trigger warning. I think comedy is a pretty depressing career. So you take the class, what happens?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, it was really intended, one, to just kind of build off of that momentum of enjoying Ivan Decker's special, and it was kind of just like, here's a reason to get out of bed once a week. Let's go take this class because you seem to be interested in this. And over those 8 weeks, I built up so much confidence because, I mean, you're dealing with social anxiety, you're depressed, and like I had been sheltered from the world for months, not
So,
leaving the
but
house.
you're going from not leaving the house to going to open mic nights in Toronto?
So started with the 8-week class where it was just going to the class and building up that confidence over those 8 weeks to the point by the end of the class, I actually volunteered to go bullet. I went first.
That's crazy.
For the non-comedy people, going bullet means going first on the lineup.
Okay, yeah, and that's a newer term. I've never used that word. Bullet is, so you have the MC and then someone goes bullet. Mm-hmm. I hate that word.
Well, I guess it's like, oh, you're taking the bullet for everyone else.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I just hate it because I don't like going bullet. So now you were so confident. You're like, screw this. I can go first and open this room up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And immediately fell in love with it. It was awesome. It was lots of family and friends came out. And everybody was, I think there were 12 people in the class. And so everybody brought friends and family. We had a jam-packed room of like 60, 70 people. And even just doing that 5 minutes, I was like, this is incredible. I want to keep doing this.
Okay. So now you find your 5 minutes, you're doing your 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. You got a 5-minute act. What year is this now? So this is what, 2020-ish?
This was end of June 2019.
End of June 2019. Pre-pandemic, what's the next step? How does taking a class become teaching a class on comedy to other people going through bipolar and other types of things?
For sure, yeah. So I mean, as soon as that show ended, put my head down and just started grinding at mics and getting booked on shows, and I even started up a couple of my own shows, and then the pandemic hit.
Right.
And so I was actually working as a beer sommelier.
A beer. Okay.
During the day.
You're getting. I mean, now we're up to 4 careers, by the way. Peer counselor, or peer. What do you call it?
Peer support worker.
Peer support worker. River rafter.
Yeah.
What was the other one right before this? Beer sommelier.
Yeah.
Okay.
English teacher in Thailand. Restaurant assistant manager.
How old are you?
I am 30.
Dude, you have worked more careers than most people work in a lifetime.
That's what undiagnosed mental illness will do for you.
So, and again, you know what I love about undiagnosed mental illness? Neither of us have been able to finish the damn conversation. So you're now in this spot of you're doing your own shows. Mm-hmm. You are doing open mic nights. You're producing. I have not seen you do stand-up yet. Right? No, I haven't.
Yeah,
so
no,
I'm assuming you're good. Like, I mean, this is when you get into just some weird things here. We're assuming you're good. Now,
thank you for the assumption. I'll take it.
Okay. Yeah. The question is now, how do you turn that into, how do you turn that into, I'm going to teach therapy, or I'm going to teach this to other people?
For sure, yeah. So I mean, well, the pandemic hit, and so I lost my job as the beer sommelier, fell into yet another long depressive episode, and actually wound up in the hospital. I was hospitalized at CAMH for 7 weeks. CAMH is Canada's largest mental health hospital, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health.
Thank God you said that because I didn't want to ask.
Yeah, no, I could see it in your face. You were like, "What's that?" Yeah. But yeah, it's CAMH, Center for Addiction and Mental Health, Canada's largest mental health hospital. I was there for 7 weeks. I was on suicide watch. It was a very scary time for the whole family. And it's a hospital that saved my life. I wound up having, I think, don't quote me on this, I want to say it was 11 rounds of ECT when I was in there too. That's electroconvulsive therapy for the folks that...
Wait, is that legal in Canada? I thought that was illegal.
No, it's actually a wildly misunderstood and stigmatized treatment where it's actually one of the most effective treatments in mental health.
Electroshock.
Yeah. So they changed the name a while back, and now it's electroconvulsive therapy. Actually, Gary Goldman has a great bit about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've gone through 12 rounds. You're in the hospital. They're afraid of you killing yourself.
Yeah.
What brought you out that time?
So that's why I had the ECT, and I got out of the hospital, was starting to feel better, and kind of on my recovery path, because when you get discharged, you're still not, like at 100%. We were still sorting out what medications I was going to be on afterwards, because there were some that I had tried. I've been on like a dozen different meds over the last 4 years.
Right.
And so trying to sort out what meds were happening, but still peak pandemic, because I was in the hospital from, the dates will forever be burned in my memory. I got admitted on June 2nd, 2020, and I was discharged July 17th, 2020. The worst possible time to be in a psych ward, because there were no visitors, no day passes, we couldn't leave. We had to wear masks, even when
So you're not even seeing smiles of your fellow patients?
For the most part, no, except for when we were eating. But otherwise, we had to be masked all the time. All the nurses and doctors were wearing like those big, yellow, like neon yellow gowns. They kind of looked like the people in like E.T., where it was like everything was hazmat-y. It was like, that was a triggering time to be in the hospital.
So I guess, look, we're getting towards the end of a show, and I want to get to the point that we were making when we were at the bar.
Mm-hmm.
What can the mentally ill, whatever you are, whatever mentally struggling, I don't even want to sound stupid, but people who are struggling, that's the way to say
folks
it.
Struggling
what
with
can
mental
folks
health.
struggling with their mental health learn from performing stand-up comedy?
For sure. I actually like to view comedy in general, not even necessarily stand-up, but just comedy in general, is it's a form of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And CBT is all about, reframing your mindset and challenging automatic negative thought processes. And that's essentially what comedy does. If you're able to find the humor in a dark situation, in a past trauma, or in my case, talking about being in the hospital and being on suicide watch, etc., being able to find the humor in that takes some of the power away from that situation.
Okay. Now keep talking. So you think making jokes about the things that have scarred you take the power out of the things that scarred you?
Yeah, exactly. It takes some of the power away. It allows for a little bit of healing, and it allows for some positive emotions to help try and offset some of the negative. You're never going to get rid of the trauma. You're not going to get rid of the negative thing that happened. But instead of it being 100% negative, you can allow some positive emotions to come into play too. So that the next time, if you're ruminating, again, if I'm thinking about my time in hospital, or I'm thinking about, all the different ups and downs that I've been through, I can think about, kind of reframe them through the lens of humor, and still have a little chuckle about it.
I like that. Now, where's the thin line between making jokes about it and maybe you should keep that shit to yourself? Should I be I always talk about on this podcast, like a friend of mine often jokes, Tom, this is a podcast, it's not therapy, but I'm blaring out my crap all the time trying to make it funny. Mm-hmm. Is that good for average people?
I think it's good for everybody within, obviously that's why, one, I always like to give content warnings before I kind of dive into some of the dark stuff.
Right.
Even try and there are ways to even bake that into the performance, and kind of bake it into the setup of a bit too. I usually get everybody to applaud for depression before I jump into suicide jokes, and I'll be like, hey, how we doing? You guys ready for, are you guys down for some jokes about depression?
Okay.
Yeah, I'll be like, give me a round of applause of consent for depression. Yeah! And it kind of gets everybody on board, makes it a lot more exciting, and gets people in the mood to, and realizing that it's okay, and that I'm okay too. But in terms of whether or not you should keep it to yourself or share it, to answer the original question, I would say that I always tell people that, and again, part of peer support is that you don't give advice, you only talk from your own personal experience. That's one of the fundamental tenets of peer support, is that there's no advice giving. It's just, here's something that worked for me, and if it works for you, take as much or as little as you want, from my experience that may or may not help you, you can leave the rest, but if you take anything away, if anything helps, that's great.
All right, what if I tell a joke about something that's very real to me
Yeah.
and nobody laughs?
Well, yeah, so that's part of it, right? Is that, so one, I always like to say that it's sometimes inadvisable to make jokes about things that you're not at least like partially healed from. Like you don't want to, like if something just happened to you that day and then you go up on stage and you tell it and, you know, and nobody laughs, that could be, I mean, it's very easy to, what's the word I'm looking for? It's very easy to tie your jokes to yourself, especially when you're telling deeply personal jokes where it's like, hey, I just bore my soul to you and told you about, you know, being in the hospital and you didn't laugh. That doesn't just mean that you don't like my joke. It means you don't like me. And that's such an easy way, like an easy thing to think. And that was something I struggled with too. But I think ultimately that's why it's so important to, like, if you're not in a place of comfort where you feel,
If you're not, but no, but you're about to make a great point.
If you're not in a place of comfort where you would feel comfortable just talking about it, then it's probably not the best thing to bring to the stage. Like if you wouldn't even have like a conversation with a buddy about it, doing it in front of a big crowd of people is probably going to cause more harm than good.
Here's the smartest question I'm going to ask you, and we're going to wrap on this one.
Yeah.
I find, and I'm not saying this as a joke,
Yeah.
but I find comedy is a career that has driven many talented entertainers to consider suicide.
Okay.
Or or a little bit safer, saying it in a safer way. Comedy is a career that has driven people to sadness and depression. How do you keep the cure from being the cause and the cause from being the cure? Or how do you keep how do you keep the cure from being the cause and keep it the cure?
For sure. I mean, and that's definitely like that's such a standard trope that everybody always says, like, oh, comedians are depressed and.
But it is. But you know what, man? It's not wrong. I think a lot of the guys I know and girls I know who are entertaining it, outside of, they're all struggling with someone. Even the hot female comedians are struggling with something else, that they don't feel their beauty or they don't feel something. So I guess that's my question for you: is how do you keep show business got you out of a depression? How does everyone else keep show business from putting them into a depression?
For sure. So I mean, again, kind of one. I think it is kind of a trope that everybody thinks that all comedians are depressed or that we're all mentally ill. But I think part of it is just because we're performing artists and we're talking, like, we're just more likely to talk about it to people because we talk professionally for a living. And so it's kind of like survivorship bias, you know, like when all the planes came back after the World War and they looked at where all the places that had like gunshots, right, and like damage, and so then they reinforced all those places, and it's like it's actually the exact opposite, because if those planes made it back with damage in those areas, then those aren't the areas that needed to be reinforced. It was everywhere that isn't that, because clearly you could reinforce those areas on the plane or damage them and they could still come back safely. And so weird analogy to make, but the idea is that, like, we associate, you know, a lot of mental illness with stand-up comedy because so many stand-up comedians talk about it. Oop, here comes a car.
I get you hurt.
Right? We associate stand-up comedy with mental illness only because we are more likely to be talking about it than most people, because that's literally our job as performing artists, to express that. The same way that, like, musicians, you could say the same thing about musicians, right? How many musicians have, you know, ended their own lives, etc.
So real quick, I think because I'm hoping real quick, if the people in my audience are struggling with something, the question I have for you have 3 quick 1-sentence tips.
For sure.
Or a few 1-sentence tips for somebody thinking of using humor to get them out of depression. Go.
For sure. One, start with the truth and talk about yourself, right? Make it personal, because it's the personal that we connect to. If you're trying to, like, make it into good material.
Okay.
If it's just like, in terms of just finding the humor in everyday life. You know, not taking ourselves too seriously and being okay with not being okay. But also, if you're not in a place of healing, you're not feeling like if you're still super like in the middle of a depressive episode, comedy might not be the exact thing that you need in that moment. Like there needs to be some level of healing.
Start with the truth. What's your next one? Go.
Yeah. So,
because I'll give you 15 seconds, set up punchline. It sounds stupid, but that's the one thing I'm still trying to learn with this podcast and in life. You got to go set up and you got to go punchline, or you got to make it, keeping it short, I think is definitely not something I'm known for on the podcast, but I think keeping it short is one. All right, I've now given you a chance to pause and think.
Yeah, well, so I guess is the question more directed to how can people use humor to improve their mental health, or how to make mental health material funny? I think that's where
let's go with the former, and we'll close with that.
For sure. So yeah, if you're looking to use humor to kind of help mental health, is that one, just not taking yourself too seriously, being okay with not being okay, being personal, being as detailed as you can possibly be, and doing it like start small. You don't have to like get in front of a crowd of 200 people and tell them how you were on suicide watch. It took me a lot of time to get to that point, right? I started telling jokes on Zoom in the middle of the pandemic and kind of workshopping a lot of this material that I'm now doing in support of the hospital that saved my life. I do a monthly fundraiser for them in Toronto at the Rivoli. That's my...
So listen, I got a friend who should have been here 5 minutes ago.
Oh my God, yeah,
I want to close with this, guys. Listen, quick shout outs to Becca, Carolyn, Ryan and Wally in our Magic Mirror part of the show. Governors, September 29th, I need asses in chairs. Spread it with Long Islanders. And I know I'm cutting this short, but that's because I got to go. And I hope you like the walk and talk. Show love where love can be shown. Where can we find you? Where's your Instagram? Where's your Twitter?
Yeah, on all social media platforms, I'm at Ryan Z Comedy. RYANZ Comedy.
All right, good night, New York.